probably assume that all I'm doing is just switching cubes behind the screen, but I'm not switching cubes.
In this video, I will reveal Bryan Saint's Rubik's Cube magic trick that fooled Penn and Teller. Here's a quick recap of what happened. Bryan opened by saying he was about to show a trick that could only be done on TV. He held up a mixed Rubik's Cube, placed it behind a green folder, and a second later pulled it out, completely solved. He then said most people would assume there's already a mixed cube behind the folder. The camera angle even revealed one, which Bryan pulled out to confirm it was there. But he insisted he still wasn't switching cubes. To prove it, he set the solved cube down, mixed the other one even more, placed it behind the folder, and immediately brought it back out, solved again. Bryan mixed it again, placed it behind the folder, and pulled it out, solved. Then he did it again, mixed behind the folder, back out, solved. At that point, Bryan said, most of you were probably thinking there must be a stack of cubes back there, so he decided to show them one by one. He mixed the cube again and pulled out a second solved cube. He placed the mixed one back, picked up a solved one, followed by another. He then introduced a fourth cube, which was a green cube. He set the green cube aside, grabbed the mixed cube from behind the folder, briefly pulled it behind his coat and brought it back out, solved once more. He mixed it again, placed it behind the folder and pulled it out, solved yet again. Finally, he said, no one could figure out how he kept solving the cubes because he promised he wasn't switching them. To prove it, he tore the folder in half and ended the performance, leaving the audience convinced the extra cubes were all just in their imagination. So, how did he do it? Here's the secret. The trick actually relies on two main ideas. First, Bryan secretly solves the same real Rubik's Cube behind the folder using a memorized sequence. Second, he uses hollow Rubik's Cube shells that look like fully solved cubes. This entire act happens in 7 phases. Once you understand what's happening behind the green folder, the first 3 phases become very easy to understand. Bryan had prepared extremely well for this act. If you want early videos and exclusive reveals, come join me on Patreon. It's free to stay updated, and there's a $1 option if you want to support, but even if you don't want to pay, at least join for free. Check the pinned comment below for more important announcements. The key idea is that the scramble isn't actually random. He mixes the cube in a controlled way, so he already knows the exact moves needed to undo it. That lets him quickly reverse the sequence behind the folder. He mastered how to solve a Rubik's Cube one-handed. While it wasn't fast enough to break Rubik's Cube speed-solving records, he was skilled enough to memorize a specific sequence of algorithmic Rubik's Cube moves that he could perform in reverse to solve the cube behind the folder. He deliberately takes the solved Rubik's Cube away from a solution when he mixes it, but since he has memorized the sequence, the mix isn't random at all. The second unique property of these hollow solved cube shells is that they collapse and stack, allowing him to secretly hide several of them on the table on top of each other during the routine. How many he uses will become clear as we go. At the beginning, the solved Rubik's Cube in his left hand isn't real. It's the hollow shell mentioned earlier. The shell has only 5 faces, with the 6th side missing opposite to the white face. When he raises the cube, he briefly flashes this missing side and the black interior. Remember, a real Rubik's Cube doesn't have a black face, so that black bottom can't be mistaken for any normal side. The only real mixed Rubik's Cube is seen behind the green folder, which is then pulled out and held in his right hand while the solved shell is placed behind the folder, since it cannot be manipulated like a real cube. After mixing up the real Rubik's Cube and setting it according to his memorized algorithm, he reverses the algorithm movements one-handedly behind the green folder. Halfway through solving, he hits the cube on the base of the table, making it look as if he placed the cube on the table when, in reality, he is still holding onto it and never lets go of it as he solves the remaining portion right before he pulls the solved real Rubik's Cube out. Take note, throughout his entire act, there is only one real Rubik's Cube, which is the one he always mixes up in front of us. Everything else you see that looks like a solved cube is actually just a shell. The real cube is always the one Bryan mixes in front of the audience. His second phase was once again the exact same steps. He mixes the cube, positions it at his memorized algorithm position, goes behind the folder, takes his time, and repeats the one-handed solve. While once again hitting the table halfway through the solve, this also explains why he never had Penn and Teller mix up the cube, nor had the host of the show do it for him, because it would completely mess up the algorithm he had memorized to solve one-handedly. The third phase, as mentioned earlier, was once again solving the mixed-up cube behind the green folder and taking it out. But in the fourth phase, things get interesting, because he not only pulls out one shell, but after placing back the shuffled cube, pulls out two more solved cubes. This might seem confusing at first, but it will make sense if we rewind what exactly happened. In his left hand is the same shell he was holding at the beginning of the performance, whereas in his right hand is a real cube. As mentioned, there is only one real Rubik's cube throughout the act. So, when he places the mixed-up cube behind the green folder, he actually performs a one-handed solve. He takes his time, which you can see him doing here, then pulls the real solved cube out, passes the shell from his left hand to his right hand, and picks up the second solved shell. This second solved shell was simply seated right below the top hollow solved shell. Since both of these are shells, they can easily be placed on top of each other to avoid using up much room on the table. He then squared the shells up, flipped them over, and was ready to collapse them during the next phase. Behind the green folder is also a third shell, but this third shell is not a solved cube. It's the cube with green faces on all sides sitting beside the two solved shells. Once again, remember, there are only 3 shells and 1 Rubik's cube in this entire act, nothing else. The entire premise was purposely made to look like he had a lot more cubes than what he showed us. At this moment, he is holding on to the real Rubik's cube, which he actually mixes up right before he places it onto the table behind the folder. You can even see at this moment, Bryan started twisting the solved cube before he places it on the table. The purpose of mixing this cube up was to get ready for the next phase, where he picks up the green shell such that the hollow missing side is facing upwards, and then he flips the cube face down. The missing side is covered with his cupped left hand. Bryan then collapses the 2 solved shells when he was reaching for the mixed-up cube right here, which is why we notice his hand press against the table because of the shells collapsing and camouflaging with the black table, causing the folder to shake. After picking up the mixed-up cube, he performs a one-handed solve behind his coat. The purpose of solving this Rubik's cube one-handedly behind his coat was actually an incredibly clever misdirection to throw Penn and Teller off and make them assume that the shells he was using were somehow ditched into his coat. No wonder it fooled Penn and Teller. The final green shell was also collapsed and pushed onto the table such that it camouflaged with it right before the very last one-handed solve he performed. Behind this mask, only the truth remains till we meet again.